Good morning, 6th grade. We're going to go ahead and move on to Chapter 4, Lesson 2, Mesopotamian Empires.
Lesson 2, Mesopotamian Empires. It matters because Mesopotamia's empires greatly influenced other civilizations. Hammurabi's code even influenced the legal codes of Greece and Rome. The First Empires. Guiding question: how did Mesopotamia's first empires develop? By 2400 BC, Sumer's city-states were weakened by conflict. As the strength of Sumer faded, powerful kingdoms arose in northern Mesopotamia and in neighboring Syria. Seeking new lands, rulers of these kingdoms built empires. An empire is a group of many different lands under one ruler. Through conquest and trade, these empires spread their cultures over a wide region. Who was Sargon? The kingdom of Akkad developed in northern Mesopotamia. Sargon was an ambitious leader who ruled the people of Akkad, known as Akkadians. About 2340 BC, Sargon moved his well-trained armies south. He conquered the remaining Sumerian city-states one by one. Sargon united the conquered territory with Akkad and became known as the king of Sumer and Akkad. In doing so, he formed the world's first empire. Eventually, Sargon extended this empire to include all of the peoples of Mesopotamia. His Mesopotamian empire lasted for more than 200 years before invaders conquered it. Who was Hammurabi? A people called the Amorites lived in the region west of Mesopotamia. In the 1800s BC, they conquered Mesopotamia and built their own cities. Babylon was the grandest of these cities. It was located on the eastern bank of the Euphrates River in what is now Iraq. Around 1792 BC, the Babylonian king Hammurabi began conquering cities controlled by the Amorites to the north and south. By adding these lands, he created the Babylonian Empire. This new empire stretched north from the Persian Gulf through the Tigris-Euphrates Valley and west to the Mediterranean Sea.
All right, just to save time on this, I'm going to go ahead and pop up Sargon's biography. I'm just going to pause it, let you read it, and so you can pause it on the video and just go ahead and read.
Hammurabi's Code. Hammurabi was thought to be a just ruler. He is best known for creating a set of laws for his empire. He posted this law code for all to read. The code dealt with crimes, farming, business, marriage, and the family, almost every area of life. The code listed a punishment for each crime. The Code of Hammurabi was stricter than the old Sumerian laws. The code demanded what became known as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This means that the punishment for a crime should match the seriousness of the crime. It was meant to limit punishment and do away with blood feuds. The code also protected the less powerful. For example, it protected wives from abuse by their husbands. Hammurabi's code influenced later law codes, such as those of Greece and Rome. Progress check. Finding the main idea. Why was Hammurabi's code important? The Assyrian Empire. Guiding question: how did the Assyrians influence Southwest Asia? The Assyrian Empire arose about 1,000 years after the empire of Hammurabi. Assyria was a large empire extending into 4 present-day countries: Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq. The Assyrians built a large and powerful military to defend their hills and fertile valleys. Around 900 BC, their army began taking over the rest of Mesopotamia. The Assyrian Army. The army of Assyria was well-trained and disciplined. In battle, the troops numbered around 50,000 soldiers. This army was made up of infantry, or foot soldiers, cavalry, or horse soldiers, and charioteers. The Assyrians fought with slingshots, bows and arrows, swords, and spears. The Assyrians robbed people, set crops on fire, and destroyed towns and dams. They took tribute, or forced payments, from conquered people. The Assyrian army also drove people from their homes. Stories of Assyrian brutality spread. Sometimes people were so afraid of the Assyrians that they would surrender to them without a fight. One of the key factors in the Assyrian successes was iron weapons. The Hittites, a people to the north, had mastered iron production, making iron stronger than tin or copper. The Assyrians learned from Hittite technology. Kings and government. Assyria extended from the Persian Gulf in the east to the Nile River in the west. The capital was located at Nineveh, along the Tigris River. Assyrian kings had to be powerful leaders to rule such a large area. They divided their empire into provinces, or political districts. The government built roads that connected these provinces. The kings chose officials to govern, collect taxes, and carry out the laws in each province. Soldiers stood guard at stations along the roads to protect traders from bandits. Messengers on government business used the stations to rest and change chariot horses. Life in Assyria. The lives of the Assyrians were built on what they learned from other Mesopotamian peoples. The Assyrians had law codes, but their punishments were harsher. Assyrians based their writing on Babylonian writing. They worshipped many of the same gods. Assyrians built large temples and palaces filled with wall carvings and statues. They also wrote and collected stories. An ancient Assyrian king named Ashurbanipal built one of the world's first libraries in Nineveh. It held 25,000 tablets of stories and songs to the gods. Historians have learned much about ancient civilizations from this library. Farming and trade were both important to the Assyrians. They brought in wood and metal from far away to supply their empire with material for building and for making tools and weapons. Connections to today. Libraries. The United States Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., ranks as the largest library in the world. It holds millions of books, photographs, and other documents. The Chaldean Empire. Guiding question. Why was Babylon an important city in the ancient world? For 300 years, Assyria ruled the area from the Persian Gulf to Egypt. Because they were harsh rulers, people often rebelled. In about 650 BC, fighting broke out over who would be the next Assyrian ruler. With the Assyrians in turmoil, a group of people called the Chaldeans took power. A new empire. Centuries before, about 1000 BC, the Chaldean people had moved into southern Mesopotamia. At that time, the Assyrians had quickly conquered the Chaldeans' small kingdom. The Chaldeans hated their harsh new rulers and were never completely under Assyrian control. Years later, when the Assyrians were fighting each other, the Chaldean king Nabopolassar decided to reclaim his kingdom. In 627 BC, Nabopolassar led a revolt against the Assyrians. Within a year, he had forced the Assyrians out of Uruk and was crowned king of Babylonia. The Medes, another people in the region who wanted to break free from Assyrian rule, joined the Chaldeans. Together they defeated the Assyrian army. In 612 BC, they captured the Assyrian capital of Nineveh and burned it to the ground. The hated Assyrian empire quickly crumbled. Nabopolassar and his son Nebuchadnezzar created a new empire. Most of the Chaldeans were descendants of the Babylonians who made up Hammurabi's empire about 1,200 years earlier. Through conquest, the Chaldeans gained control of almost all of the lands the Assyrians had once ruled. The city of Babylon served as their capital. Because of this, the Chaldean Empire is sometimes called the New Babylonian Empire. The greatness of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt Babylon, making it the largest and richest city in the world. Huge brick walls surrounded the city. Soldiers kept watch in towers that were built into the walls. Grand palaces and temples were located in the center of Babylon. A huge ziggurat stood more than 300 feet, 92 meters tall. When the sun shone, its gold roof could be seen for miles. The richness of the ziggurat was equaled by that of the king's palace. The palace had a giant staircase of greenery known as the Hanging Gardens. Babylon's Hanging Gardens were considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. These terraced gardens, built like huge steps, included large trees, masses of flowering vines, and other beautiful plants. A complex irrigation system brought water from the Euphrates River to water the gardens. It is believed that Nebuchadnezzar built the gardens to please his wife. She missed the mountains and plants of her homeland in the northwest. For his people, Nebuchadnezzar built a beautiful street near the palace that they could visit. It was paved with limestone and marble, and lined with walls of blue glazed tile. Each spring, thousands of people crowded into Babylon to watch a gold statue of the god Marduk as it was wheeled along the street. Chaldeans believed that the ceremony would bring peace and bigger crops to their empire. The Babylonians built many new canals, making the land even more fertile. To pay for his building projects and to maintain his army, Nebuchadnezzar had to collect very high taxes and tributes. Because his empire stretched as far as Egypt, it had to have an efficient system of government. One Greek historian in the 400s BC described the beauty of Babylon. He wrote, "In magnificence, there is no other city that approaches it." Outside the center of Babylon stood houses and marketplaces. There artisans made pottery, cloth, and baskets. The major trade route between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea passed through Babylon. Merchants came to the city in traveling groups called caravans. They bought Babylonian goods, pottery, cloth, baskets, and jewelry. Babylon grew wealthy from this trade. Under the Assyrians, the area had been fairly poor. The people of Babylon also made many scientific advancements. The Chaldeans, like other people in Mesopotamia, believed that the gods showed their plans in the changes in the sky. Chaldean astronomers, people who study the heavenly bodies, mapped the stars, the planets, and the phases of the moon as it changed. The Chaldeans invented one of the first sundials to measure time. They also were the first to follow a 7-day week. The fall of the empire. After Nebuchadnezzar died, a series of weak kings ruled the Chaldean Empire. Poor harvests and slow trade further weakened the empire. In 539 BC, the Persians recognized that the Chaldeans had lost their strength and leadership. The Persians took advantage and captured Babylon and made Mesopotamia part of their empire. However, they allowed their newly captured land to keep its distinct culture. The Persians wisely did not want to destroy all the Chaldeans had accomplished.